Hello, I'm Goat King. Welcome to the realm. Unfortunately, I've had a cold recently, so if my voice is a little you know why. Today, we're going to continue talking about and fleshing out our Zelda-themed dungeon for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'm going to show an image of the abstract we came up with, the general layout of our dungeon, and I am going to point out again that we are using one set DC for all locks and force open checks, and we're probably going to use it for stealth checks too, just to make things easy on the game master to remember and keep in mind. That way you don't have to keep looking things up, and if your players decide to do something weird, you already have a DC to go off of. That DC is 26, considering the Ancient King's Treasury is a level 9 dungeon. The entry challenge we're going to use is going to be a couple of shambling troops. They are large groups of zombies that act as one, and we are going to go ahead and design the layout for the map. I'm thinking maybe this takes place where the throne room used to be, so this specific room doesn't need to have a very complicated shape, but this is the general idea I've got going for it. And since we're using two shambling troops, we can have them originate over here as kind of one big blob, but as they fight with the players, one of the blobs will detach to chase after players and attack them, while the other one will remain to guard the entranceway. I will put the Shambler Troops stat block in the video here. And one thing I worry about when making this is that I intentionally want a lot of trivial encounters, but I worry about how trivial they'll be because DCs and bonuses to checks increase quickly in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So I think a lot of the things I throw in here are really definitely not going to be a big threat, which I think is okay. I want to see how that works out. Shambler Troop. Let's talk about a couple of their cool abilities. For one, because they're zombies, they're automatically slow. So a Shambler Troop is permanently slowed 1 and cannot use reactions. So they don't have any reactions, and they will get 2 actions per turn, which is the really limiting thing for zombie like monsters in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is they're all automatically slowed. They have an initial HP of 90, and at that time they take up 16 squares. It's 4x4, or any shape you make with 16 squares. With a threshold at 60 HP where they lose 4 squares, and then another threshold at 30 HP where they lose 4 more squares, bringing them down to just 8 squares total. They're immune to death effects, disease, mental, paralyzed, poisoned, and unconscious. They have weakness 5 to area damage, positive damage, and slashing damage, and then weakness 2 to splash damage. So that means if you have casters using any spells that affect more than 1 square, the monster will take 5 additional damage. And if you have obviously positive damage. With a healing spell, does positive damage. In fact, you could do the 3-action healing spell. It'd be an area of effect. You know what? I need to look that up. I need to look up and see if weaknesses stack. And about weaknesses in general, if 2 weaknesses would apply from the same attack, you only take the higher of the 2, you don't stack them. So for instance, if the Shambler troop got hit with the 3-action heal spell, that's an area damage effect. It affects an area, and it's also doing positive. Now, the Shambler troop has weakness 5 to both of those, but weaknesses don't stack, so you just take the greater, or since they're the same, in this case, it's just 5 extra damage. That's good to know. That's good to have on hand. Slashing damage, a lot of players are going to have slashing damage. Most of your marshals will probably have some way to do slashing damage. And splash damage will really come in handy if you've got an alchemist in the party. Splash damage, they cause that whether they actually hit the armor class or not. If they miss, they'll cause their splash damage, and that will trigger the splash damage weakness, so they'll get an additional 2 hit points done even when they miss. Shambler troops have the troop defenses ability, and that's just in reference to how their size, the number of squares they take up, gets smaller as they lose hit points. They have Shambling Onslaught, which takes either 1 action or 2 action and can be used once per round. The effect is the Shamblers lash out at any enemies in their squares or within 5 feet with a DC 18 basic reflex save. The damage depends on the number of actions. So if they spend 1 action, it's 2d6 plus 5 bludgeoning. And if they spend 2 actions, it's 2d6 plus 9 bludgeoning. Grave Tide. The Shambler troop is less organized than most troops. It can move into other creatures' spaces. Other creatures can move into its spaces. Its spaces are difficult terrain to other creatures. So unlike normal monsters where you can't end your turn in its space, you can walk through a shambling troop and stand there. But moving through a shambling troop counts as difficult terrain, so it's going to take twice as much speed to move through. And remember, we round down in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if you have a 25-foot movement speed, which a lot of people are going to have, then you can only move 10 feet, because divide by 2, round down, you can only move 2 squares through a shambling troop. Unless you have something else that's making you faster, which level 9, I kind of expect you would. The Shambler troop has the 1-action ability called Form Up. Let's say, for instance, the troop is within these 16 squares, right? The troop chooses one of the squares it currently occupies, we'll choose this one, and redistributes its squares to any configuration in which all squares are contiguous and within 15 feet of the chosen square. The troop cannot share its space with other creatures. So that conflicts with, that last sentence there conflicts with Grave Tide, where the Shambler troop is less organized than most troops. And since Grave Tide is specific to the stat block of Shambler troop, and Form Up is a general ability that many different troop monsters have, I'm going to rule this as the way Grave Tide says it, so I'm going to say yes, they can share spaces with other creatures when doing Form Up. If you know of an official ruling on this, or something I've missed that you can point me out to, feel free to comment it. Feedback is always helpful and accepted. So, in this case, the troop can choose one of the squares it already occupies and then redistribute the rest of its squares to a place within 15 feet, 5, 10, 15 feet of the starting square, as long as it's contiguous. So we could go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We could have the troop go from a square to being this whole like triangle here in one action. Actually, these corners here might not be doable. 5, 10, 15. So it wouldn't actually be able to get to this square. So they'd have to put that closer somewhere. Maybe here and here. Just leave these two unmoved. But as you can see, they actually have a lot of movement they can do and a lot of area they can occupy. And because of the Grave Tide ability of the Shambler troop, they can occupy the same spaces as the players or other enemies. So they could be really dangerous. Essentially, they can turn, like, if they were in this square and fighters come up here, 3 of them maybe, to fight directly, it can rush forward like this, and now all 3 of those players are in difficult terrain. So it's harder for them to move around. And they're all being attacked by the Shambling troop. That's pretty crazy, actually. That's really cool. And the final ability that the Shambler troop has is troop movement. This relates to how the whole troop strides. And what it does is, whenever a troop strides, it first forms up as a free action to condense into a 20-foot by 20-foot area, minus any missing squares. So 4 by 4, essentially, if this troop was here and they wanted to stride somewhere, they would first need to, as a free action, form up into, say, a square. Now they could put the square here, but let's say in this instance they form back up into this square, and then they can stride with their 20 feet of movement in any direction, as if they were one gargantuan creature. If any one of the squares from the troop passes through difficult terrain in their movement, it affects the whole troop. So we will have, when we actually go to run this encounter, we'll have one troop stay near the door to protect it, and the other troop is going to weave in and out of the various pillars, trying to get to and kill the other players. This should be a very easy fight. They are essentially party level 9 for this dungeon, so they are a CR4. They're -5, which makes them an XP of 10 individually. So with 2 of them, they are essentially an XP 20, which is any lackey or standard creature. If my math holds, it might be a little lower because they're not just 4 less, they're 5 less. But that is where that goes down to. It should be an easy fight, but it should be interesting and flavorful simply because it's a troop and you don't see those very often. And finally, when the players are finished with the fight, they will need to get in. They can use a force open check to clear the rubble in front of the door and get in. DC 26, that's what we've set for this dungeon. That should be doable, and if not, they can try a couple of times until they get it. This next room has a very simple purpose, and it's going to be a very quick move through the dungeon. There is going to be a combat encounter, but it's so low level that it's less than trivial, honestly, and they might kill in like one hit. It's not really there to pose a combat challenge. It's there to provide the resource they'll need in order to solve the puzzle. And this is where we introduce our coin doors. The coin doors we're using in this are a replacement for key doors in Zelda dungeons, where in Zelda dungeons you get one-use keys that use to open doors. In this situation, we're going to use ancient coins that operate the doors kind of like a gumball machine. It'll be gold coins from the ancient king. And the reason for this is that one-use key doors are kind of dumb in a world where rogues exist. And they're as good as they are at picking locks. It's kind of silly to use the key doors. This allows you to have the locked doors that require a resource without having it feel like, without you having to turn to the rogue and say, no. When they go, well, can I pick the door? No, you don't have to do that in order to like make your dungeon work. You can just have a resource that's expendable for these doors. The other good part about that is, and it won't come up in this dungeon's fairly short, but if you had a really long dungeon, like a mega dungeon based on this, and you wanted to use the key doors and they missed a coin for some reason, and you're looking at the map and you're like, well, when they get to here, they're not going to have enough coins to actually get that door open. I don't want them to have to backtrack forever just to be able to get through this one door. Throw in an enemy and give it one of these coins, or throw one of these coins on an existing enemy. So when they fight it and kill it, they can get the coin and then use it for the door. Even if they go back afterwards and retrieve that coin, it's gold. They might not be able to spend it as is, but they can get it minted into modern currency for your setting and then use it. So it's not lost. And it's not like the one-use keys where, if they added extra to make sure you definitely find enough to get through the dungeon, now you've got useless keys. It's not like that. In this room, we're going to use a single skeletal giant. And again, this is way under-leveled for the party. It's not really there to be a combat challenge. This is a CR3 creature. This is a CR3 creature with 50 hit points and the negative healing trait, so harming spells would heal it. Immune to death effects, disease, mental, paralyzed, poison, and unconscious effects. They also have resistances to cold, electricity, fire, piercing, and slashing. Pretty typical for your skeletons, but it's pretty typical for your skeletons. Speed of 30 feet, and since this isn't a zombie, it's not slowed 1, it's going to get much more speed, maneuverability, and if it gets a high initiative, you might get a couple of attacks out of it. Melee glaive, plus 12, deadly d8, forceful, reach 15 feet, 1d8 plus 7 slashing damage. It's got a melee for horns, plus 12, agile, with a damage 1d10 plus 5, piercing. Broad swipe is a 2-action attack. The giant makes 2 strikes with its glaive against 2 adjacent foes, both of whom are within its reach. The multiple attack penalty does not increase until after both attacks are resolved. So that's something you'll probably see fighters have, and maybe a few other players who might have taken an archetype to get that kind of fighting is where you can do 2 attacks and your multiple attack penalty doesn't apply till after. And Terrifying Charge. This is a 2-action activity. The giant strides and makes a horned strike attack with a +4 circumstance bonus to damage. If the strike hits, the giant attempts to demoralize the target. Pretty simple enemy. I will throw its stat block up so you guys can take a look at it yourselves. And this would be something, it'd be fairly easy to modify it to add or remove, say, some of the skeleton abilities that you can add to various things. Say Bloody, the skeleton is covered in dripping blood and gains fast healing equal to its level. Collapse is a reaction when the skeleton is critically hit. It collapses into a pile of bones and the attack deals only normal damage. The skeleton can reform in a standing position as an action, but until it does, it's immobilized and flat-footed. Explosive Death. When the skeleton is destroyed, its bones scatter and explode as the necromantic energy holding it together is released. Adjacent creatures take 1d6 slashing damage per 2 levels. There are a bunch of abilities to specific types of monsters, in this case skeleton abilities, that you can tack on if you want to make the enemies more flavorful or a little stronger. We'll have various pillars around the room. The coin-operated door is up here. The entrance to the room is down here. And obviously there will be the skeletal giant roughly in the middle. If the skeletal giant gets a chance to act, he will attack the closest player to him and is going to be extremely aggressive. Once defeated, the skeletal giant will drop, or one of the things they can find on the skeleton giant will be a pouch of coin. These are all ancient coins with the face of an ancient king on them. So they're not directly spendable, but you could have them find a treasury, or maybe a treasury that would exchange them for maybe equal value. Or perhaps they might be able to find a collector of antiquities and get more than the face value of the coins, which would be, I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? Like, you go through a dungeon, you get some coin, and it's weird coins, and you're like, I don't know if this is worth all that much. I thought we'd get more going through this dungeon. You find a merchant of antiquities, and he buys it all off of you for a significant sum. That'd be cool. So, when the skeletal giant dies, they will find on its body ancient coins, 24 copper, 9 silver, and 1 gold. The 1 gold will be the one that works in the coin door. And the coin door is a lot like a gumball machine. It's got a dial that you can turn and a slot for a coin, and if there's no coin in there, or the wrong type of coin in there, either be it silver or copper or any coin that isn't an ancient coin, it'll only turn halfway and it won't go the rest of the way. You can turn it back and retrieve your coin, but it doesn't open the door. And if you put the gold in there, it'll turn all the way around. It'll clink, it'll click, it'll clatter. Door will pop open, the coin will be consumed. After this, there's the main room of the dungeon. They're going to spend plenty of time there. They might even rest there, but we will get to that in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Goat King. And come back to the realm for another video.